This Issues in Organizational Communication lesson is about workplace relationships. In one way or another, we have danced around this topic for a good portion of the course, first through the human relations frame that we explored last week, and earlier in manager and leadership communication in that lesson, as well as a couple of other places. In this lesson, we're going to look at three particular aspects of workplace relationships that are important to examine. As always, I encourage you to have a piece of paper and a pen by you so that you can record some answers to some self-reflection questions. One thing that's different about this lesson from most of the others is that those questions are sort of spread throughout the lesson itself and not just at the beginning. This is a question that was asked by the Gallup survey organization, and as I've mentioned before, they have an extensive management consulting operation as well. It was one of 12 characteristics of good managers and good management that were explored by Gallup, and they used this question to explore it. Do you have a best friend at work? Consider that for a moment. This question actually raised a lot of eyebrows and some criticism and some pushback from executives and even the media who covered the results of the survey. Relationships at work? Why are those important? Why, yes, relationships at work. I think it's intuitive to most of us that you build some personal friendships and relationships at work, but for many executives, that's something that gets in the way of the organization's effectiveness. Indeed, when Gallup first asked this question and began to report out on the results of it, a number of managers either rejected the question, rejected the survey, rejected the results, or laughed at the Gallup organization. This was particularly true among organizations of lawyers and physicians, engineers, those who thought that relationships come second to the work that had to be done, and were in highly competitive organizations. In one instance, an executive canceled the implementation of the survey. They were just about to do the survey because the CEO had just sent a memo discouraging workplace friendships. So why ask about friendships at work? Well, one of the things that Gallup did discover, and I think they had the last laugh, was this. The research suggests that positive relationships, friendships at work, relate to business-relevant outcomes. Profitability, safety, inventory control. People are less likely to walk away with things that belong to the organization. And an emotional connection and loyalty of customers, not just between and among employees, but between the organization and its customers. Customers can see when there are deep friendships in the workplace, and those friendships result in better employees and better customer service. There's a lot of focus on superior-subordinate relationships, and again, in another lesson, we actually examine that in managers and leaders. So this lesson is about the other kinds of relationships that might develop in an organization. More specifically, we're going to look at three. Coworker communication, and related to that, difficult coworkers. Mentors, and romance at work, plus what has become to be known as the dark side of workplace relationships. So the first thing we're going to examine is friendships between coworkers, relationships between coworkers. There are a variety of reasons that O'Hare explores in relationship to this idea, and I think they're important to take a look at. They're almost inevitable, workplace friendships, and there's some reasons for that. The first is just proximity. You're working near somebody for 8 hours a day or longer, and you wind up going to lunch together, you wind up working on projects later into the evening, and you develop friendships just by the sheer fact that you're next to each other all the time. You develop and reveal shared interests through the process of interacting with each other over such a period of time in such close proximity. These shared interests, of course, could include work interests, what the organization does and the products it makes and that sort of thing. But you also might discover through interaction some other shared interests, hobbies that you have, sports that you like, sports teams that you root for. In our department at LaSalle, there's at least 8 different university major college football teams represented. In fact, most of them play in one football league, so that many Saturdays during the weekends in the fall, there's a sort of a friendly rivalry going on between all of us in the department. The point is, we all like college football and we all like to root for our teams, and so that's a shared interest that we've developed that's helped strengthen many of the friendships that we have in the department. The third reason why coworker relationships develop are common tasks. You're working on the same thing, working on the same projects. You might begin to discuss those projects and share ideas about how they might be done better. And through celebrating each other's ideas, you begin to develop a friendship. And then finally, friendships develop because of, in order to satisfy social needs. That is the idea that on Maslow's hierarchy, that mid-level kind of need for connectedness, socialization, not being isolated. The friendships develop because we are naturally friendly people. We're naturally social people. Not all of us are friendly people, and not all of us are extroverts, but we want to develop relationships with people that we spend a lot of time with. There are a number of things that can be done to manage coworker communication and develop coworker friendships. I think in most of the suggestions I'll give in the next few moments relate to helping to develop good coordination and relationships between coworkers. Not necessarily friendships, but if you do these things, you'll also, I think, be a good friend to many of the coworkers in your work group. The first thing that you can do is to bring solutions with the problems when you have meetings with coworkers or the boss. Quite often when coworkers get together, they tend to complain a lot about what happens in the organization. In teachers' lounges in high schools and elementary schools around the United States, you go behind closed doors and teachers complain about students and parents and that sort of thing. However, what is more effective is when coworkers can bring solutions to those problems. And this is particularly true if you want to influence your managers, and those people might have the authority to make changes in the organization. If you're always complaining about things but never offering solutions, then you come off as basically somebody who whines a lot. Coworkers can help each other develop solutions to shared problems and bring those solutions forward to people who might actually be able to do something about them. Another thing this is something to avoid when managing relationships with your coworkers, and that's to avoid blaming other people for things that have happened to you, or even worse, things that are your responsibility to begin with. It's an easy thing to look for other people to blame for problems that you're experiencing or when a project goes wrong, partly because we want to save face. We don't want to look bad in front of our bosses, but also because there might be some repercussions for things going wrong in terms of penalties and lost revenue. However, if you continually blame other people for problems that you have or for projects gone wrong, then you'll find that people don't trust you anymore and they won't want to work with you, and that's obviously a way to destroy a relationship. The third thing is to monitor your verbal and nonverbal communication patterns. What you say to people, how you say it, how you carry yourself around people influences how they trust you. So for instance, if somebody comes to your cubicle to have a conversation with you and you're still staring at your computer screen or looking at your phone and not looking up at the other person when they're speaking with you, that sends a nonverbal message that you're not really present or tuned in to what they're saying. Verbally, there's a number of behaviors that we engage in that put people off, that might alienate us or distance us from our coworkers. These include talking down to coworkers, always demeaning their ideas or making fun of the ideas that they have without offering a substantial reason why you might disagree with them. It includes maybe taking into account or not taking into account cultural differences in terms of language use and ways that people communicate. There's a variety of things that make you a less attractive person and make employees, other employees, steer away from you. If you have a problem with someone, it is best to approach them about the problem first. A lot of people avoid conflict or confrontation. If something has gone wrong with a project, there's a tendency to wait until you're in the presence of a boss or other coworkers to complain about it. If you bring up a problem in a bigger setting, like a meeting, and you haven't discussed it with your coworker or your boss or somebody else that you need to report to, then that's called blindsiding them. You basically throw people under the bus, which is an interesting expression in and of itself, and they will come not to trust you. There'll be some resentment that you threw them under the bus with this problem. And if it is in fact their fault, then it's probably something you and the coworker should speak about and then approach the boss together about how to solve the problem and share responsibility. However, if you just wait until you're in a group before you bring up an issue, that tends to kill relationships. Keep your commitments. If you say you're going to do something, follow through on a project, come up with a report that somebody needed, then you should do that. If you don't, then people tend not to trust you much. Share credit for accomplishment, ideas, and contributions. There is a bit of an office political game that happens when people take credit for ideas that weren't theirs. They put their name on a report they didn't write. They speak up at a meeting with an idea that they and a coworker had spoken about 2 days before the meeting. And all of this tends to, while it might help you in the short run by taking credit for an idea, it ultimately undermines any relationship that you have with coworkers. Good coworkers share the credit. If somebody else came up with a great idea, you say that it's their idea. And you share those things before bosses so that this increases the amount of feeling of teamwork and togetherness that's in the work group. Finally, you try to help other employees find their greatness. If you have developed a relationship with a coworker, or if you see a coworker who has some talent that hasn't really been revealed to other people, to bosses, etc. Say, for instance, they're very good at writing reports, and yet they haven't been asked to write many or any. You try to provide them the opportunity. You talk them up to bosses in terms of somebody who might be able to do a job that management is looking to have done. So that they can have the opportunity to develop. What goes around comes around. Karma is one of those things that works in both directions. And if you spread the good karma of helping people develop their own potential, then you will probably develop those opportunities as well. The coworker will work out for you, will look out for you, or a boss will notice how you've helped other people develop and recommend you for a management position because helping talent develop is a good management skill. While it is important to foster good relationships, not everybody at the workplace is somebody you want to be a friend with. And really, in some instances, they're people that you don't even want to be around. The O'Hare chapter identifies some of the types of difficult employees as well as some ways of dealing with them. One type of difficult employee is the independent other, the lone wolf, the person who wants to go off on their own, tackle projects all by themselves, tend not to socialize. These people also sometimes take credit where they really shouldn't be taking credit. And it's difficult to make connections with them because they're so into their own work and not playing nicely with others that it is even difficult to find them sometimes at work. The soap opera star can also be called the drama queen, which might be a more familiar term to you. These are people who bring their personal problems and their work problems and their love life and everything else, and they turn everything into a big long story where the person becomes the victim of all this bad behavior by other people. And they constantly talk about all the horrible things that are happening to them in the job, and they might gossip about other people and so on. These are people that tend to suck the morale out of the organization. They're always complaining about something, and so they tend to put out a negative vibe, which can influence the quality of life in the work group. There is the bully, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's somebody who forces other people to do what the bully wants, belittles and demeans people, makes fun of the work that they're doing, undermines their accomplishments, primarily to satisfy their ego, and often, if they don't have very much power of their own, to undermine the power that other people have because they're doing their jobs well. The adolescent is a person who hasn't grown up yet. They tend to treat the workplace like high school, with a lot of gossip and talking about trivial things and cars and video games and all of that. And they take up a lot of work time doing that when other people are trying to get things done. The self-protector is someone who is only into their own self-interests, trying to get ahead in the organization without and to keep other people from getting ahead. They believe that the only way to climb up the ladder is over the hands of the people trying to get up the ladder at the same time. The last two are sort of variations on the same thing. The first is a rebellious playboy or playgirl who tends to hit on other people in the workplace. They're rebellious because they don't follow the authority and the rules of the organization against that sort of thing. The abrasive, incompetent harasser is someone who takes the playboy, playgirl thing, which is primarily flirting and teasing other people, into the realm of harassment, where they're constantly pursuing someone. They are sending a lot of messages constantly in the face of someone they're attracted to, and they also tend to be somewhat poor at their job. So not only are they abrasive and harassing somebody, but they're not doing their own job particularly well. You might be able to think of some other coworkers who are other types of difficult employees, but these are some of the most prominent ones. There are a number of strategies that have been developed for dealing with these sorts of folks, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about now. Some of these are communication strategies. In fact, many of them are. First of all, decide whether you can ignore these people. It is possible in the organization that the problematic behavior that difficult employees engage in really doesn't affect your job all that much. And if you can put up with a few minutes of gossip from the soap opera star, then you can get back to your own job and it doesn't really matter. Make sure you're not a difficult person. Sort of review these types of people and your own behavior in the workplace, and you make sure that you're not doing things that would undermine the trust and credibility that people place in you. Consider the differences in people's backgrounds. There's a mistake here on this slide. It should be consider the differences in people's background, not in differences. What this means is that people's cultural background, their ethnicity, their national heritage, their age, there are a variety of things influence the way people communicate. For instance, different cultures have different standards for personal space, and so if somebody is standing really, really close to you, that might be something that was natural in their culture that is not natural in the culture that they're working in now, or from your background. So you need to understand this a little bit. Many diversity programs in companies are built on this this idea that you need to understand communication differences betwixt and between cultures and ethnicities and age groups and so on, because misunderstanding can occur if you don't. So before you lay into somebody for being a difficult coworker because they are standing too close to you, try to understand if that's because they're trying to harass you, or is it the way that people stand in their culture. If needed, confront the person by describing the problematic behavior. There are a number of resources available on conflict management and on dealing with people who are angering you in some way. But the biggest thing is to be able to describe the specific behavior that seems to be causing you making an issue for you. If you're able to describe something and then explain how it feels to you, then you provide the opportunity to have a conversation about the behavior. If you go to someone and say, "You're a real jerk and I can't stand working with you," that tends to shut down communication pretty quickly. Finally, you might want to consider mediation, having a facilitator of some sort engage in a conversation that helps the problematic employee understand his or her behavior and helps the both of you have a conversation that might lead to ongoing dialogue between the two of you. There are more tips in the O'Hare article on page 14 that you might want to examine. So here's the first self-reflective question, stealing from Gallup. Do you have a best friend at work? And you can substitute the word best for a good friend. Do you have a friend at work that you could rely on, that you look forward to spending time with, maybe outside of the workplace? And if you do, describe that for me.